Well, hi everyone. Welcome to this global hangout. Today we're having a conversation about coronavirus and we're talking about the misinformation out there surrounding COVID-19, myth busting as well. And to do that, I'm joined from Italy by Manlio Di Domenico.
Hello, Elena. I am a physicist and my lab is currently tracking the online discussion about misinformation on COVID-19, tracking millions of tweets.
Now, in the Netherlands, we have with us today Maritje Schaake.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be with you. I'm in Amsterdam now to stay in quarantine, but I normally divide my time between Stanford University in California, where I live, and the Cyber Peace Institute, where I'm the president and which is located in Geneva. And from both places, I look at trust, resilience of democracy, and how the online environment and business models play a role in that.
And in the UK, Ellie Kemp.
Hi, yes, I'm head of crisis response for Translators Without Borders. We've been monitoring social media feeds in a number of Asian languages in particular, and working with others to send out myth-busting information in a range of languages to reach as far as possible.
Well, right off the bat then, guys, perhaps I want to ask you, as you've been tracking this, as you've been researching many of the myths or misinformation out there about coronavirus, what is perhaps some of the strangest information that you've come across, the craziest examples, or, even things that just really worry you?
I think there's quite a lot that's worrying. It's largely, in our experience so far, it's been about people suggesting possible cures or ways of preventing the virus. I think my favorite one so far has been inhaling onions and keeping onions by the bed when you go to sleep.
That is definitely not true. Has anybody else anything else out there they're especially worried about?
Well, I think the geopolitical battle for the narrative about what is actually going on. So where the virus first appeared, how it spread across the world, whether authorities took their responsibility, is one that is coming from the top. We have real interest, for example, coming from China in changing the narrative about what their role is, whether they have taken their responsibility or not. And surely there's a big PR machine rolled out now. So I think what's really important to keep in mind is that disinformation often comes from the top. And we've also seen false claims being made by President Trump in this context, which is actually very, very problematic.
I just want to jump in and briefly ask you the difference between misinformation and disinformation, because we should probably get that straight, right?
Sure. So I think it's about the difference between whether there's a claim on something like, that is false, or whether there's a whole strategic agenda behind eroding trust in liberal democracy as such, sowing confusion, overloading people's timelines with so much information that they are really unable to navigate it anymore. The World Health Organization has spoken of an infodemic in this context, which is spreading faster than the virus itself, but it is actually at least as dangerous. So we should not underestimate the danger of what disinformation, false claims, commercially driven or politically driven manipulation can actually lead to.
Manlio, I saw you nodding along to some of that. What are your thoughts?
So I perfectly agree with what has been said so far. And actually what we have been trying to do was to monitor and also to quantify to which extent users on Twitter specifically, because Twitter allows us to access the public conversation about this topic. And we have been trying to quantify the exposure of users to this information. And actually, I have to add that I am worried by, let's say, misinformation, mostly because we have seen this, what we call now in our jargon with my colleagues, the "it's a flu, bro" effect. And it's just by minimizing the relevance of this epidemic from the very beginning. And now, instead that it exploded to the world, we are seeing the politicians and our leaders starting to realize what they have done. And we have seen this with the data. So we have, from the analysis of these millions of tweets, for instance, in Italy, we have seen how the epidemic wave arrived just after the infodemic wave. So we make this distinction. And from a mathematical perspective, because I am a physicist, the laws behind the two processes are exactly the same. So the math is very, very similar. And we have seen that the Italian people were sharing a lot of unreliable content before the arrival of the epidemic. But when we had the very first outbreak of more or less 20 people in Lombardy, that now is the epicenter in Italy, we had the official press release by the government that attempted to provide us with the real risk of this virus, and everything changed. So the amount of shared unreliable content dropped dramatically, and the amount of reliable content, so mainstream media and scientific sources, increased very fast.
Guys, sorry to interrupt. I can see some people nodding along there with what you're saying, and I'm wondering if they want to just jump in and say what they've been experiencing from their end on that.
Well, sometimes it's hard to imagine that in a crisis like this, where we should all stand together and really feel responsibility for what each of us can do to stop the spread of this deadly virus, that there's also people who see an opportunity to exploit the fear, who are really thinking long and hard about what might be the best email to send people that they would then click on because they think it has urgent updates about the coronavirus, for example, which in turn will cause downloading of malware or some kind of attack that could be organized by criminals. So we should not underestimate the cynical way in which bad actors are trying to exploit this moment of fear, or what the agenda might be behind what was shared about, downplaying the risk and the consequences of that, because it really has devastating effects on the trust in authorities, whether people were well informed, whether people were warned for the risks that they were incurring. And I think that this question of trust in experts, trust in authorities is a crucial one right now. And we have to identify that there are bad actors trying to erode that trust because they want to break up our societies anyway. And they see coronavirus and all the pain and hurt that goes along with it as an opportunity for their own, purposes, let's say.
We're talking about, trust and who we can trust in all of this. I mean, we at our verification team here, NBC, has also been looking into that, and we certainly came across one occasion, at least, when inaccurate information had a very serious consequence. And I want to bring in now Rory Arrow. Now, Rory is our executive producer from the verification team, and he can tell us a little bit more about exactly what that team found. Rory?
Well, you might remember that President Trump has been talking about various treatments that might be a breakthrough in the treatment of COVID-19. And one of those he talks about was a substance called chloroquine. Now, that's normally a drug that's used to treat malaria. You may have taken it when you go on holiday to a remote place. That drug is certified by the FDA for treatment of malaria, but it's not yet certified for treatment of COVID-19. Now, lots of people obviously listened to that announcement, and we believe that some of them may have taken the wrong drug in response to that. There was one man in Arizona who took a substance he thought was chloroquine and actually died as a result. The substance he really took was a substance that is used to treat fish ailments in aquariums. Now, we at the Verification Centre wanted to find out if that was just a one-off. And unfortunately, what we found was quite shocking. Online retailers of this substance, chloroquine, which in its form where it's used to treat fish is called chloroquine phosphate powder, sales and demand for that substance online have actually surged in online retailers, showing that perhaps this man was not a one-off and people are buying a very dangerous product. Now, we've got with us Mark Valderrama, who's the owner of the aquarium store Depot, and he had exactly this experience, a surge in demand for this highly toxic product. Mark, can you tell us your experience of this and how you eventually had to take the product off your store?
Sure, sure. When the announcement was first made, my traffic peaked around 7 times its normal traffic. And within the first couple of days, I was inundated with emails and text messages from customers or potential customers that were asking me if they could use this for human consumption. When the announcement first came through and I saw the headline that said chloroquine, immediately I took the product down. And the reason why I took that down is because I had a feeling that everyone was going to confuse chloroquine for the product that I sold. Because it's really easy with the headline when it says chloroquine to make a link saying, well, if it's chloroquine phosphate, if it's hydrochloroquine, it's probably all the same thing. Let me try it.
And how much product do you think you sold before you realized that this was the reason people were buying it?
Well, I was selling my normal sales, which is about 3 to 5 orders a week. There's not that many people who order from me since it's a very specialized medication. But with me, I wanted to take it down right away because I was seeing eBay listings for this product go as high as $5,000. And this product normally would be anywhere from $30 to $70, depending on where you get it from. And it just didn't feel right to me that this was happening. It was literal price gouging.
And you've actually had abuse for taking your product down, haven't you?
That's correct, yes.
What kind of things have people said to you?
I mean, there's stuff I probably can't say on the air for it. It's very verbally abusive. It's a lot of swear words. It's anger. Some of it was saying that I was spreading misinformation because of something that Trump tweeted. It was just really, I think people are just desperate for things when people get sick, and they were just looking for something that would work.
Thanks, Mark. And Helena, this basically sparks a wider debate about whether politicians and research institutes should really be announcing the kind of drugs that they're researching for treatment of COVID-19 before they've really been approved.
Right. Absolutely. Thanks so much, Rory, and as well to you, Mark, for sharing your insights with us so candidly. Thank you very much indeed. Great to talk to you. But I think it makes a really important point about the risks of that kind of trickle-down effect with inaccurate information at a time when people are desperate to, cling on to that information, particularly when their health, their lives are on the line. Maricha, I want to put that to you. I mean, about, who do we trust in situations like this? That's what it's about, isn't it?
Well, so I was very happy to hear how quickly Mark acted, because that was really, clever conclusion that maybe people would make the connection and that maybe he should be precautious. I think there's also examples of people who have really thought the other direction and thought, how can I best gain economically from this? There was a man in the United States who had bought up all the wipes, the disinfecting wipes and the antibacterial gels, and tried to resell them on a platform like Amazon, for example. And we've seen price surges of facial masks and others, which has then had a bad effect on the doctors who needed it. So there's been a lot of bad behavior that we could see, but we also saw on the other hand, I would say, new respect or new appreciation found for experts, not only for experts in the medical field, but also for the workers in hospitals, for the workers in our grocery stores. So whereas it had been a big trend to attack experts, attack the elites, this narrative that we so often hear from especially populist voices, to say that, what are all these elites doing? They're hurting our societies. What are experts good for? We know better what the people want. I think this virus has really shown the importance of listening to experts. And I think that those politicians who haven't, and we've seen quite a few of them, and it's an ongoing problem, are also paying the price. I mean, Boris Johnson himself was saying, I'm going to continue to shake hands. It's not a problem. I would encourage you to shake hands. We've just found out that, unfortunately, he himself has been diagnosed. And I wish him, a quick recovery. But I think it shows that just to claim things about a disease that requires specialized knowledge can have bad consequences. And when leaders do it, they have a big audience. So it has a broader spread of bad impact.
Right, Ellie, I saw you nodding along, and I do want to ask you about that as well, because your monitoring also encompasses other languages outside the Anglosphere. I mean, what have you found?
Yeah, we're monitoring in languages like Chinese and Tagalog, a range of, particularly at the moment, Asian languages. I think what we're seeing is mostly that desperation of people to find some answers. This is all very scary, and I think misinformation fills the spaces where people's questions aren't getting answered, essentially. What we're seeing, and what we've seen in Translators Without Borders work in other major emergencies like the Ebola outbreak in Eastern DRC, for instance, is that you can't fill that space with fact unless you're speaking people's language. And that means both actually speaking the language that they understand, so Tagalog or Vietnamese or any of the other several thousand languages on the planet, but also using terminology that makes sense to them. And I think we've really seen that we're all speaking a foreign language at the moment. Terms like social distancing, I don't know about you, I'd never heard of it before COVID-19. I think many other people hadn't. And my colleagues who are translating into a vast number of other languages are saying, this is a real problem to get this concept across. Either a Kenyan colleague was saying, this idea of social distance in most African cultures, it's pretty foreign. How do we translate it? So in some cases it will become, you translate it literally, and then it becomes meaningless. So one colleague told me that in Tagalog, it's being literally translated, and it means distancing yourself from society, which I don't think is really what anybody would intend. And others are saying, well, we're having to translate the idea as we understand it, which is, keeping away from people, keeping your distance. But I think the fact that when we use terminology that people don't understand, we're not actually helping. And people continue to turn to the attractive, kind of idiomatic content that's out there on social media that speaks their language and that addresses their concerns right now.
That's such a good point. And who ends up being the most vulnerable to that kind of attractive language, or the scams out there, or the misinformation, in your experience?
So this is going a bit beyond social media, because most of our learning around this in the recent past has been around the Ebola outbreak in Eastern DRC. The people who are less likely to have access to information anyway are people who have less access to technology, less access to education, so they're less likely to be literate. And when the language that they speak is marginalized in their own country, which is the case for many, many languages around the world, in the countries that we work in, they're simply excluded, doubly excluded from the information. For instance, in the Rohingya refugee camps in Bangladesh, we found that older people, and particularly older women, have less information about the virus than others. And some of that is down to language. For instance, men that we interviewed were more likely to understand the word for epidemic and to understand the concept of an epidemic, whereas women understood the same words to mean diarrhea. So you've got a very serious risk of misunderstanding and miscommunication if you're not using the words that people understand for that particular concept.
Guys, there is just so many layers to this. I'm just wondering, kind of quick fire round, how do we solve this? How do we get past it?
Well, one thing that's desperately needed is more research. And so we need access to information on what happens under the hood of the big tech companies. Everybody's online now. So there's unprecedented amounts of traffic going on. And I think it is crucial. It was before coronavirus, it is now, and it will be after coronavirus, to understand much more of what was happening under the hood of these companies. Because without access to information, it will be really hard to make evidence-based policies and to find solutions. And that in turn erodes the trust and our ability to have solid ground to stand on when we try to tackle this serious problem.
Manlio, perhaps a thought from you?
Yeah, again, I totally agree. And That's why we started to collect this incredible amount of data. But look, I work at the Bruno Kessler Foundation. It's a leading research institution in Italy for artificial intelligence. And I can tell you that we need further research about this, not only in the field of social science and so on, but also from a more technical perspective, because it's complicated to extract narratives from online discussions. So it's at least in an automated way. You still need humans going through the tweets, through the messages, and annotating everything. But while this can be done when the flow, the volume of information is reduced, I would say it's normal. Now it's impossible. We collect up to 5 million tweets per day, but we know that we miss around 15, 20 millions around the world. So it's an incredible amount of information that we miss. And even if we had access to those data, like getting in touch with other research groups or Twitter itself, it will be incredibly difficult to track and analyze the narrative. So a lot of research is required on this side.
Meanwhile, whilst we've got, millions of tweets going out on a daily basis, then where should people go for information? How should they be suspicious? How should they make sure that they inform themselves correctly? Briefly to anyone.
So,
sorry, go ahead.
No, so I think there are the World Health Organization on the global level. There are groups of doctors and experts in the fields of viruses. There are policymakers that are responsible for implementing, in a society, what might be the right measure. So, for example, whether you're now in a lockdown or not in a lockdown is a combination of public policy and the government's responsible and the virologists who are informing that policy. So I would say, always look at a couple of resources of authoritative voices and then see, the pieces of the puzzle of the facts that you need coming from different sides always.
And one of the challenges of that, of course, is making sure that that content is out there in the widest possible range of languages and in the formats that people are going to find accessible. And of course, that a lot of that goes beyond social media. If you look at recent spikes in cases, that you're getting some of the most rapid growth in countries with very low rates of literacy. And so the communication has to go offline as well. It needs to be radio broadcasts. It needs to be audiovisual content.
Absolutely, so important to consider as well. Guys, thank you so much for taking this time to hang out with me today, for sharing your insights. That's all we've got time for in this particular hangout, but to everybody who is tuning in, thanks for your company. Do stay safe, stay at home if you can, and do stay connected as well. I'll see you soon. Bye for now.